Chapter 17. Continued. "You are beautiful, my sweet Minnie," rapturously exclaimed Cleo, after a more impassioned burst of love's eloquence than she had before given utterance to. "You are beautiful, darling, beautiful!" And her right arm wound tighter around the waist of the young lady as she spoke, and squeezing harder the latter's hand, she sealed her utterance with a passionate, heart-melting kiss. After the kiss, 2 or 3 deep-drawn sighs from her companion, and then the utterance, "And you are splendid, Juan! Oh, splendid, splendid!" The embrace was warm that followed this. "Be mine, sweet Minnie, darling, charming girl, be mine!" passionately pleaded Cleo. "I love you so much, and can love you ever, and we can be happy. Say, will you be mine, dear darling Minnie?" Cleo squeezed her companion's waist till what little breath her words had left in the other was nearly gone. No man, never so deep in love, could have done the part of a pleading lover better than did Cleo, no, nor so well, no matter how beautiful the object, or what the depth of his love. Was she carried away with the part she was acting, or was she merely acting well her part? Judge for yourself, reader. "Will you marry me, Minnie? Marry me?" Cleo asked this vital question in a pleading tone of passionate vehemence, and one would have thought that the pause between the question and the reply, however short, would have been an age to her, such a look of intense anxiety did her face assume. "My God!" exclaimed the young woman, raising her head with a sudden start from the shoulder of Cleo at this question, and looking at the latter with eyes that looked nothing if not love the most passionate. She added in a sighing tone, I am married now." The slightest shade imaginable passed over the face of Cleo. A gleam shot through her eye, like lightning through a summer cloud, leaving no trace behind. The young woman's admission had outraged the feelings of Cleo, and for an instant she thought of administering a scathing rebuke, but as instantly resolved upon another course. She would see to what lengths the woman would go. "Well, if that is the case, Mrs. Warren," she strongly emphasized the abbreviation, "it is best we should part," she said, drawing away, and speaking in a tone cold and repellent, her eyes shining with a cold glitter. "No, no, don't go, Juan!" exclaimed her companion, a look almost of anguish sweeping over her face. "We can love and be happy notwithstanding," she continued, "and I love you madly." "Love and be happy? And you a married woman, a wife!" exclaimed Cleo, looking at her intently, the look having more of sorrow than of anger in it. It was not the reflection from her heart, and her tone is more of condemnation than reproof in them. They did not express her feelings. Judging from her look and tones that it would be an easy matter to overcome the scruples of her splendid lover, yet taking the words as reproof, the young woman bridled up somewhat, and said in extenuation, "Yes, love and be happy, you and I. Why not, pray, if I am a wife? Look at the wives who have lovers. Why, their name is Legion, as you must know, Juan, and I shall be no worse than—" "Do you live with your husband?" broke in Cleo. "What if I do? He needn't know anything of our love affair, be none the wiser for it, and if he should, there'll be no love lost between him and me," returned the young woman, clasping the ungloved right hand of Cleo's in hers, pressing it warmly. The latter shook her bent head slightly and slowly, as if doubtful whether to yield to the sophistry of the young woman, or resist it to the end. "Oh, don't be a second Joseph!" exclaimed the latter, in a slightly taunting tone, leaning forward as she ended, and whispering in Cleo's ear, "Better be like him we spoke of." With a light laugh as she said this, she kissed most lovingly the brow of her companion, and drawing back, looked at him, her, with fervent passion, if not downright love, flaming in her eloquent eyes, a smile the most ravishing wreathing her ruby lips. The kiss was scarcely cold on Cleo's brow when the young woman uttered an exclamation of surprise, which was not all surprise, however, but mingling with it deep disappointment, not a little rage, and something of consternation. What brought it to her lips was the sudden appearance of a lady and gentleman, in the immediate vicinity of the place, where she and Cleo were sitting, in a sequestered spot. The latter saw the couple the instant of her companion's exclamation, and divining the reason of its utterance, watched the face of the other narrowly. It flashed, and it paled by turns, Her eyes snapped and flashed, and shot out fires of rage and jealousy, if not deep hatred. Her lips were tightly compressed, and her cheek showed a slight movement of the jaws, as though the firm-set teeth within were grating hard. Her hands clinched, and her breast rose and fell quickly from tumultuous but suppressed passion raging therein. The change that came over her was great indeed. From the angelic almost, her face had become demoniacal almost. And the man whose sudden appearance had wrought this change, who had stopped with his partner as suddenly as he had appeared upon the scene, showed signs of no inconsiderable perturbation. His face flushed, then paled and remained pale. His brow grew dark, and his eyes flashed fiercely. He breathed hard, as no one could see, and his right hand clinched tightly. For a moment he gazed most intently at Cleo's companion, and the latter gazed as intently at him. The man looked upon the woman, and the woman looked upon the man, both with about the same feelings, very likely, and not strange that they did. The gaze of each grew into a glare, with jealousy and rage in that of the man, and these with hatred in the glare of the woman. It was the calm before the storm, and the calm was of short duration. The man, about 35 he was, left his companion suddenly, and came quickly towards Cleo and her companion. The latter sprang to her feet, her eyes flashing with fierce fires. "What in hell are you doing here with this man? What in hell are you doing here with this woman? My wife?" were the questions fiercely put to the companion of Cleo and herself, respectively, by the enraged man. Before Cleo could reply to the question put to her, her companion cried, rage in her tones and hatred in her eye. "What are you doing here with that woman, you good-for-nothing, false-hearted wretch, you?" Withering the tone in which that woman was uttered, and withering the look that woman got from the other woman, the latter getting a saucy look in turn, if not one of triumph, and that look brought things to a crisis. With a cry that an infuriated wildcat might have uttered, at all events envied, and with the suddenness of that animal's spring, sprang Cleo's companion for that woman, and with all the ferocity of the animal named, she pounced upon her, and then came the tug-of-war for one short moment, went to the scene of conflict, rushed the injured husband to protect, perhaps the injured wife or that woman. With no little trouble he finally succeeded in separating the fair combatants, one being perfectly willing, the other enraged at his interference, and not letting him off scot-free, as 2 bloody marks on his face, made by sharp nails, plainly told. The battle, though short, was sharp if not decisive, and resulted in more or less damage to hats, ribbons, laces, feathers, furbelows, and things, that woman getting decidedly the worst of it. She fought on the defensive, and for no purpose other than to protect herself, and was no match for the injured wife, who, having her quarrel just, and thus thrice armed, fought to avenge her wrongs, to punish the infidelity, and to shame her husband, to learn that woman a lesson, and to take satisfaction, what could be had of it, for her own bitter disappointment. With these at her back to spur her on, and fighting as she did with the ferocity of an infuriated tigress, what wonder that the injured wife worsted that woman? That feathers flew, and hats, and ribbons, and laces, and things went by the board. After the battle of contact came the war of words. Begun, it waxed hot, then hotter and hotter. The injured wife, torn from that woman, discharged at the latter several volleys of red-hot oral shots, with no return fire from the enemy, who retired from the field most expeditiously, and in great disorder, shot after shot being sent after her as long as she remained within range. The victress then turned her guns upon the recreant husband, and hot and heavy, sharp and severe, fierce and furious the fire on both sides. Fast and furious flew charge and countercharge, scoff and sting, slur and sneer, taunt and thrust, invective, recrimination, wrong, sarcasm, and not a little Billingsgate. In short, shell and round shot, shrapnel, grape, canister, and minnie-bullets were hurled with great rapidity from either side, and with more or less effect, very many of the shots, no doubt, touching on the raw and rankling deeply. Both parties were undoubtedly severely wounded, as, from the nature of the case, they must have been, but for some time relaxed not their fire. Cleo, during the pitched battle between the injured wife and that woman, and through the wordy war between the TW and IW, sat a perfectly unconcerned, disinterested, though an amused spectator of the two affrays. Her sympathy went out towards neither of the combatants, as she considered them all on a par, morally speaking. She was satisfied respecting the injured wife, and drew her own inferences regarding the injured husband and that woman, and cared no more which got the best of it, than did the old woman who watched the fight between her old man and the bear. But this battle, like all other battles, came to an end at length. Becoming exhausted by its severity, and running out of ammunition, the combatants ceased firing regularly, indulging only in occasional shots, and during the forced armistice patched up a provisional peace, the injured husband remarking, when came the lull, to the wife of his bosom, that that woman was his cousin whom he accidentally met, and whom he was going to bring to the house. "Oh, I'm so sorry," said the wife of his bosom in a mock serious tone. "I'm so sorry, as that gentleman," indicating Cleo, "is my cousin, whom I accidentally met, and whom I was going to bring to the house. What a pity! Such a nice time we might have had, you and your cousin, me and my cousin." This was the last that Cleo heard, for the whilom combatants turned and moved away, the injured husband without seeking to press Cleo for an answer to the momentous question he had put to her, the wife of his bosom without giving Cleo as much as a glance after her last remark. Before they passed from sight, the wife was hanging on the husband's arm. A semicircular, back-action sort of reconciliation had taken place, and the happy couple moved on and out of sight in the most proper way, just as if nothing had happened, to all appearances as happy as any couple on the ground. And perhaps they were. Perhaps each condoned the offences hymeneal of the other, upon each promising to sin no more, and who knows but they may be happy yet? "I wonder if she told the truth about married women," mused Cleo, still retaining her seat, whipping her crossed right leg. "I fear, alas, there is more truth than poetry in it," added, in a voice just audible.
Chapter 18. Suspected. A fortnight passed. Cleo, determined to go it alone, did so for the most part. She saw many sights, and her adventures were not few. Mrs. Grundy began to suspect. In fact, one of her numerous disciples said to another one day, when told that the old lady half suspected that the young scapegrace, madcap, fast young men, spendthrift, profligate, etc., known as Mendez, but called Don Juan, was not a man but a woman, and that she believed she could tell who it was, said to or asked her sister disciple, "Whom does she suspect?" a la Don Bryant, in relation to another party. The answer was, "Well, she didn't tell me exactly. If she had, I shouldn't tell, you know, until I knew for a certainty, as I wouldn't wish to say anything to injure anybody, you know. But she said it was very queer that this young fellow— Isn't he handsome, though?" Here the disciple whispered in the ear of her sister disciples, "If he is a he," at which both laughed heartily. She thought 'twas very queer that this Juan Mendez, you know they call him Don Juan, should be the only person able to ride that great, horrid horse she calls Thunderbolt, beside herself. You know who I mean. When lots of fellows have tried it and failed. And says it's very queer she should let this young fellow, both giggled, drive her favorite blacks, when not even Harry Prince ever drove them. Very queer, she thinks, and I think so too. She called him, this Juan Mendez, her cousin, you know, from Cuba, but it's very queer that they are never seen together, though he has been seen to go in and out of her house. But this she could manage easy enough, as she had things her own way. Did you ever see such a creature as she is? I declare I never did. It's perfectly awful how she conducts herself. Shoots, plays billiards in a page's dress, performs on the flying trapeze, boxes with fellows. You heard about her knocking Frank Foster over. Fences, and worse than all, oh, horrible, smokes cigarettes. The two roll their eyes in holy horror. And it's funny, isn't it, that her cousin smokes nothing but cigarettes? So Brother Bob tells me. Let me see, what was I going to say? Well, no matter. Of course you heard how her cousin dashed up 7th Avenue and through the park on that great horrid horse of hers, with a lot of policemen after him. Did you ever hear of such a thing? I never did. Just think if it was her who did that." Here the speaker whispered something into the ear of her sister disciple, at which both giggled, and then looked very demure, if not horror-stricken. "Then Mrs. S., and you as well, suspect—" The speaker hesitated a moment. "You suspect Cleo Clayton." "Well, I didn't say so, anyhow. If you think so—" "Pooh! I have suspected it myself. It's just like her." At this juncture, a third sister came up. "What do you think?" she exclaims, after kissing the two and being kissed by them in turn. "I really don't know. What is it?" the two exclaim in a breath. Number 3, not to keep her sisters on the tenterhooks of suspense, unbosoms herself in the same rattling, disjointed, parenthetical way as did the most wordy of the other two. Most wordy, because she didn't give the other a chance to get in, and to the same effect, winding up a most brilliant peroration, with, "Now you won't say a word, will you, for the world? It might not be true, you know." "I'll never mention it," says one. "I'll never say anything. You know me," says the other. Then number 3, in a whisper, "Let the cat out of the bag." The others well knowing what was coming, though pretending ignorance until after the cat was out, when they let number 3 know that they knew all about it. To her no little chagrin, as she, if not first in peace, first in truth, and first in discretion, was generally first in innuendo, first in gossip, and first in scandal. She retired, not a little chapfallen, in search of fresh ears, and sisters green that hadn't heard, and who didn't suspect what she suspected. Yes, Cleo was suspected. That little seed we spoke of in a former chapter had been planted, had taken root, sprung up, and was growing finely in the soil tilled by Mrs. Grundy and her co-laborers in their peculiar field. And Cleo knew it, and was satisfied. It was just what she wanted. She wouldn't have them know for certain as yet, but she wanted them to suspect, and they did. If they derived any pleasure from suspecting, she derived no small amount of satisfaction in knowing they suspected. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 weeks subsequent to her little love affair at Staten Island, that Cleo strolled into the St. Nicholas, her knobby coat and pants, vest, concealed by the former, buttoned, fitting to a T, of the richest and most fashionable stuffs, shamed all other similar garments. Her hat and boots, by their luster, made all others look lustreless. Before her flashing solitaires, all other diamonds paled in their ineffectual fires. And what with her rig, her easy, graceful walk, her air of nonchalance, she distanced all competitors. There was no such swell upon the street, or in the hotel, as Don Juan, as the handsome, debonair young Cuban was now generally called. From the very start on this masculine masquerade, Cleo, from her magnificent makeup, her graceful air and bearing, and beauty of form and features, had attracted very great attention, but now that she was suspected, she came in for a much larger share. Those who looked at her before, admiringly and critically, now looked at her all the more closely and sharply, to detect, if possible, the woman in the clothing of the man. But such for her air and bearing, and demeanor under fire of the many eyes leveled at her during the day, that scrutiny was baffled. She was a conundrum they could not solve, but for her great beauty, her hands and feet, smaller by far than were ever seen on a man of her size, all would have given up the conundrum. And, as it was, many did, declaring that no woman could so deport herself and play the masculine to such perfection. Into the spacious, lofty bar-room of the St. Nicholas she leisurely strolled, every eye upon her, of which fact she, to all appearances, was totally unconscious, though her eyes, as they wandered carelessly about, undoubtedly caught the gaze of many others, to which, however, she was utterly indifferent. For all the effect produced upon her by the battery of eyes, it might as well have directed its glances at a bronze statue, so utterly concerned was she. The battery of eyes that could flush her face, rob her of self-possession, and make her feel ill at ease, must be more powerful and better mannered than any that had ever shot its glances at her. Whipping her right leg every time in advance and gently humming some favorite air, she approached the bar and called for a small bottle of Widow Clicquot. She might have seated herself and drank at her ease, but she chose to drink the wine standing, and did so, her left elbow resting on the bar. Paying for the wine, she rolled and lighted a cigarette, and left the bar-room. passing over the tessellated pavement of the long and spacious vestibule in the same free and easy, unconcerned and graceful manner as when she entered, seeing everybody, looking at none. She had been the rounds somewhat that day, meeting with a single adventure only, and that in a 6th Avenue car, when she pulled from his seat a contemptible fellow whom she detected in the act of insulting a young girl by touching of hands and feet, laying him flat on the bottom of the car in a single blow. All in all, it had been a dull day with Cleo. Stepping into the gentleman's furnishing emporium near the entrance of the hotel, she purchased one of those portable folding seats, forming a tripod when extended, and which can be used as canes when not wanted as seats. With this, she went to the portico, and arranging it, sat down by one of the pillars on the broad stepping stone by the entrance. "I'll give them a good look, and more reason to suspect," she said to herself, laughing inwardly as she sat down. "I am a sore puzzle to the boys, girls as well, they can't make it out. Don't know whether I'm t'other or which, and that's what's the matter." And there, at the entrance to the St. Nicholas, sat Cleo, most conspicuously for half an hour, the observed of all observers, most decidedly the cynosure of all eyes. Thousands passed up, and thousands passed down, and few the eyes that missed a glance at the handsome and noticeable young swell, who sat there so cool and unconcerned, under fire of sharp, glancing eyes. The men looked sharp, and the women stared. Some strongly suspected, if they did not believe the handsome swell to be a woman. Some were deep in doubt, not knowing whether to suspect or not, while many, though Don Juan had become quite noted, had never heard his sex questioned, and so passed without suspecting or doubting, but thinking, perhaps, that many a fine lady might sigh for the young swell's face, minus the mustache, and die in envy of his hands and feet. Men remarked openly and offhand concerning the disputed question, and not always beyond the hearing of Cleo, troubling her not, however. Women turned after they passed, whispered and giggled. Men ogled Cleo, and Cleo ogled the men, smiling sweetly and smoking serenely. "They say that's a woman," said a gentleman to his friend. "A woman, eh? Huh! If you'd seen her strike from the shoulder as I did today, knocking a fellow on the flat of his back with one good square, well-planted blow, you wouldn't go much on her being a woman," said the other in return, relating then the circumstances we have alluded to. "Who's that, Bob?" "Don't you know? Don Juan." "The devil, you say? Is that him? Well, he's a swell of the first water, isn't he? Never saw him before. Heard of him, though, but only within a short time. He's from Cuba, isn't he?" "Yes, so they say, but don't you know it is suspected that he is not of the masculine persuasion?" "No, never heard." "That's what some think, and more, some suspect that Don Juan is no other than Cleo Clayton." "Whoa! You don't say. Believe it, Bob?" "Don't know. She says it's her cousin from Cuba. She was born in Cuba, you know. All I've got to say is, if it is Cleo, she is playing the role to perfection, but then she always does everything excellently well." "And all I've got to say is," said the other, "if it is a man, he is playing the eye business in a way that few women can equal, and playing it to a masculine audience, too." 1,000 remarks similar, or bearing upon the question of the young swell's sex, were uttered, some of which Cleo overheard, being much amused therewith. 2 young bloods passed and repassed, lifting their hats with significant smiles as they passed her the second time, which salute she returned most gracefully and with the sweetest of smiles. She at length began to get tired of the fun. She wanted to be on the move. She rose from her seat just as a gentleman near her said to a friend, "I'm betting it's a woman." Cleo immediately took out a roll of notes from the pistol pocket in her pants, and turning to the gentleman, said, "I'll take you. How much will you lay it's a woman?" opening the roll of notes as she spoke. The gentleman was set back, confused by this sudden action of Cleo, and said nothing. "I'll lay 500, said the latter, and pulled out a note of that denomination, saying as she held it out, "Cover it, sir." "Oh, no, that makes a sure thing of it. I'm not betting against sure things. I'll take water, sir, said the gentleman with a laugh. Cleo smiled as she returned the note to its fellows in her hand. She had bluffed the betting man, and he laid down his hand. A full one. But come, said he to Cleo. I'll pay a bottle. Come. I'm with you, said the latter. Feel of that, if you think I'm a woman, she said with a laugh, raising her right arm after disposing of her money, and bending the elbow. Feel of that. And she turned her arm towards the gentleman as she spoke, her left hand upon the big bunch of muscles thereon, as hard as iron. Just as the gentleman was raising his hand, a sharp, piercing scream of terror was heard. Cleo dropped her arm and turned. Up Broadway, and close at hand, came tearing a pair of horses attached to a phaeton, in which vehicle was a lady and child. It was a runaway without a driver. Broadway was tolerably clear for nearly a block above, as sometimes happens, and quick as a flash, Cleo darted into and up the street, just ahead of the flying horses, and before the latter reached Spring Street, she had caught the nigh horse by the bridle, and with a spring that the most agile acrobat would have applauded, she bounded to the back of the animal, catching it off by the rein, and the off horse by the nigh rein, and putting their heads together and towards her, stopped their mad career almost instantly. It was a daring, difficult feat, splendidly executed, and while being performed, the hundreds of lookers-on stood with bated breath. Concluded, and deep-drawn respiration followed, with sighs of relief. Who, seeing this feat and thinking of the celerity, strength, and daring required for its successful accomplishment, believed that Cleo was a woman, must have been terribly shaken in their belief. She could have bluffed them all, then. No sooner had she stopped the horses than a crowd began to gather around, and in half a minute it had swelled to an immense multitude. Dismounting as soon as she had fairly reduced the frightened animals to subjection, Cleo was lost in the vast concourse, which bestowed its hearty plaudits upon her.